Does everybody have a book that ordered one? Okay. All the people are down there eating pancakes for a whole hour. Whew. They're still down there eating. Okay. Did you get a book? Man with the money. He can pay me later. Okay. Let's get started. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks that you bring us together in your name. We thank you for your holy word, for the incarnate word in Jesus. We thank you for many different ideas of the hereafter. Guide us and direct us as we look at this book, that it might expand our thought process a little bit, help us to think more deeply, to pray more often, and to be guided by the Spirit. So bless our study and be with us tonight. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, we got a number of things to consider tonight. I have all my cheat sheets up here. There were no handouts tonight. There will be from now on handouts every week, and I'll tell you why there are no handouts tonight. Next week, we will get back into the Gospel of Matthew. And I know many of you, probably half of you, weren't here this fall when we started the Gospel of Matthew and went the first 12 chapters. So I've put together a review of the first 12 chapters that'll take one night. So be ready to, but we'll have handouts for that. And then we'll probably do 3 chapters of Matthew each week. And right now, tentatively, we'll possibly go into Holy Week, but that's when my time ends. So I'm up for that. We have a process. The reason there aren't any handouts tonight, I will be using a fair amount of quotes for our thought, for our discussion, and you walk a fine line when you're dealing with copyrights. I can tell you a very quick story about what happened to me. The second book that I wrote was entitled Affirming Our Faith Together, where parents taught their own children confirmation, not the pastor teaching the children, but the parents teaching the children. And first year went like gangbusters, at least up in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, in that area. And I don't know, I wasn't getting a commission at that point, but I was getting a straight check at the end of the year. And second year, all of a sudden, it was minuscule, the check. And so I saw Sonia and Ray, who were the publishers, at a church gathering, and I asked them about it. And they said, we just haven't been selling them. They went like great last year. So I went to one of my friends that I knew was using it. I said, are you using Affirming Our Faith Together? Of course. I said, well, how are you using it if you're not buying any books? Well, it is spiral bound. So we can make our own copies of what we're doing. And not that it didn't hurt me. I wasn't going to buy a new Cadillac out of it or anything like that. But it just shows you how fuzzy the copyright laws are and how people deal with them. So we want to deal straight up as Bruce did when he was using Wally Taylor's book, and we'll be doing that with the book tonight. But the next weeks are Matthew. Just a thought, because somebody raised a thought the other day about reading through the Bible in 1 year. I started January 1 to read it through probably for the 3rd time from Genesis through Revelation. And I've read it other ways, and here it is, March the 5th, and I'm on Leviticus 20, or Deuteronomy 20. It is so boring, so bad, so difficult to understand. So if you're interested, I can run off copies on how to read and understand the Bible. Anybody interested in that? I have copies that I've made. Okay, I'll make some and bring them next week. Because I want you to start in New Testament. Get that under your belt before you go back to the Old Testament. Okay, here's our procedure tonight. I'm going to start with some warm-up quotes so we get some discussion going. Al, do you have the microphone back there? Bruce has got it. Bruce left. Anita's got it. Okay. The reason we want to do that is so that when these are archived or if they're online streaming, then they know what the question is, the people that are not in the room. And so I will start with some warm-up quotes just to get you talking a little bit. Then we're going to talk about 5 people and 5 lessons that we learn from those people. Then we'll come down to the point where, what do you think? How do you feel? So be thinking about that as you go along. And if time allows and you're interested, I can tell you what Jesus said about the kingdom of heaven. You might be interested in that. And that's about it. If you want to know what Revelation says about the kingdom of heaven, I have a book on that too. So, okay. 15 years ago, Mitch Albom captivated people with his book, The First 5 People You Meet in Heaven. And if you received or have read that book or received the review that I made on it, the 8-page typewritten review, you know that it was about Eddie at the amusement park. I want to read from the front of the book a note from, and this was what was fascinating to me. About this book, there are so many little cliches and things that you'll come across. And this comes from the very front, a note from the author. And he talks about his beloved uncle, Eddie. But he talks about when he was a child, and he says, quote, "From that moment, I viewed heaven as a place where we encounter those we touched on earth, and where we get to see them again. But I recognize this in my view only. There are many others, along with many religious definitions, and all should be respected." And so there we get the quote from Mitch Albom. Well, when you got your books, before you read them, who did you expect the next person to be? What did you think? Anybody? Did you have an idea?
I thought it'd be Jesus.
She thought it would be Jesus. Okay, that's a good answer. Anybody else? Boy, you must have really read deep or something. Okay. Anyway, how many of you, as you read the book, you know, I say there were little things in the book, but as you read the book, you probably saw the dedication in the front. The dedication was to Chinka, if you recall, the little girl of our lives. And I don't know, there must be a history there with Mitch Albom and his family. Maybe he and his wife, the Chinka was there. But he also says for all the nurses out there, and like those who cared for Chinka, touched our souls more than they know, which I thought was kind of neat. So we weren't even into the book yet, and I'm curious and I'm learning things. Okay, here's a quote. Now you ought to be able to talk about this. "No story sits by itself. Our lives connect like threads on a loom, interwoven in ways we never realize." What do you think of when you hear that? Our lives are connected like threads on a... Bill, there we go. Need a microphone. Hey, it's working.
I just wanted to say there are
Turn it like you're singing.
Hello.
There it is. Yeah, it got to be rock and
There
roll.
are no coincidences. I found in my own life, looking back, the connection that you mentioned. It's just incredible to me to think that there's a thread throughout the whole thing. And there are no coincidences. Whatever happens to us, whenever it happens, is meant to happen.
Okay, that's Bill's thought. Carol's got something up here. You'll be in shape when the night's over, Anita. Yeah, Peg's coming tomorrow, so.
That quote made me think of how people, all the people in my life, so many of the people in my life have influenced me. And it brought, when I read that, it brought me to think back over the people who have really influenced my life. And I'd love to meet them in heaven.
Many years ago, some of them, maybe. Anybody else? Okay, I got another one. If you want to write this down, you can write it down. Page 200 says, loss is as old as life itself. Loss is as old as life itself, but for all our evolution, we are yet to accept it. Loss is as old as life itself, but for all our evolution as people, we are yet to accept loss. Anne. Up.
I think that all of us kind of anticipate a life free of pain, and every time we get pain, we go, whoa, what happened? And why me?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing ever said it wasn't going to be there. So I don't know where we got the idea that we were somehow going to be missing that, but every time it happens, it's like a surprise.
Very good. Anybody else? Loss is as old as life itself, but for all our evolution, we are yet to accept it. Think about the last relative that you lost. I'm one of two. My brother and myself were the only sons and daughters of Frank and Florence, and my brother died in November. Now, it was not unexpected. In many ways, we can say, looking back, yes, it was a blessing, because he had Alzheimer's in the worst sort of way for over 3 years. That makes me, what was I thinking? But, you know, John, to see him, a PhD, a college professor, you know, there, who can't remember things and tended to drop his telephone down the toilet. So, you know, it's just some of the things. But are we prepared to accept it? I think, anybody? I think maybe yes a little, maybe no a lot. But it's yes and no. Okay. What'd you do with this one when it said that Annie seemed all blue and then she realized she had no body, no middle, no bottom, no stomach, no thighs, no feet? What'd you think about that? What came to mind? Something had to come to mind when you read that. What? Spirit, ghost down here. Anybody else? Those two sound pretty good answers, right? Okay. Don't divine things happen every day? Don't divine things happen every day? How do you see that in your life? Do you see divine things happening?
Every time we wake up.
Every time we wake up. That's a good point, Bill. That's true, especially when you get a little older. Someday you'll realize that. Here's one. Yes, Cindy.
Thank you, Anita. In going along with what you just said, I think the older we get, we see divine things more during the day. There's a neighbor 2 doors down from us, and we always talk about a God thing. She'll call me up and she goes, Cindy, I have a God thing, something that happened to her.
Yeah.
And it was a divine experience,
Yeah.
And I think the more we live in the moment, the more we see and realize it's a divine thing. Our lives are a divine thing.
Right.
A sunset, anything. Just if we live in the moment, we really take notice of things and say, that's a God thing.
Even when you go through loss or when bad things happen, as you look back, you can see the God thing in it. What's the show at 9 o'clock on Sunday night? God Friended Me. You all been watching that? It's a great show. Keep watching it. It's set to automatically record on mine. They just came back on after about a month off. Okay. This one I think we'll all just agree on. The world does not cater to our timing. I believe there was one other quote in there is, how old is too old? How old should you be when you die? Something to that effect. Okay. Secrets. We think by keeping secrets, we're controlling things, but all the while, they're controlling us. Does that hit home? I see a lot of heads nodding. Okay. We'll conclude with this one, then we're going to get on to the 5 people and the 5 lessons. On earth, we get the what of things. The why takes a little longer. On earth, we get the what of things. The why takes a little longer. And I think that goes back to don't divine things happen every day. Okay, any questions or, boy, your discussion was just outstanding. I didn't know how to deal with it, but okay. Now we're going to talk about the next person you meet in heaven. And if you read the 5 people you meet in heaven, you know that Eddie died when what I called, in my amusement park was Cedar Point. Anybody been to Cedar Point? Okay. My grandfather was a chief plumber at Cedar Point for 20 years. So I learned what it meant to be a maintenance man at an amusement park. Well, after he died, long after he died, about 20 years ago, they got one of these demon drops. And I could just, that's what I imagine this happening. So, Steve Jobs told us if we're really looking for the next person in heaven, he says he's got an app for it. Well, he's there. He's there. Okay. We did the quotes and the discussion. The quotes I made verbal to protect the copyright. It was that simple. Okay, who was the first person? Why did I go that far? Who was the first person? Well, I didn't see Eddie as the first person. Who? Dr. Samir. Dr. Samir, the one who did the surgery on Annie's hand, and it led to many other things that happened after that. But I liked one of his quotes at first when he said to her, "Nobody can talk when they first arrive. It makes you listen better." Nobody can talk when they first arrive. It makes you listen better. Wow. I think my wife was saying that to me this afternoon. But Annie says, "I'm just a person who makes mistakes." We'll talk about that a little more as we go on. Samir says, "I'm here because when you first get to heaven, you meet 5 people from your time on earth. They were all in your life for a reason." They were all in your life for a reason. So what do we think? What is the lesson then that we learn from Dr. Samir, whatever his name was, Smith, sharing that with Annie? What lesson did we learn from that? Ann?
I think that
I'll repeat it.
for me, it is that we need to look deeper at people around us instead of just assuming things or just, hi, how are you? We need to, there might be more in that person that you need to know, or you might be able to help that person.
Verbatim what you said. You need to look deeper at people and what they're saying, and as you interact with them. That's a good thing. There's even more here, though. Think about Annie, the 5-year-old, being pushed off the dock by Eddie, and then Annie having surgery, Dr. Samir, and what did he say after that? He did many of these because she was the first one who had these had this accident. Okay, so the first lesson, as I view it, was history. How history grows as a result of things you do when you're younger. Think about your jobs, what you did in life, or your parenthood, whatever you did up to this point. Now, I know some of you are only about 45, but yeah, you are. But you reach a point where you look back and say, why did that happen? What did that say to me when it happened? Now, I'm going to talk about confession later on, but you know my confession, if you've had me before, is that I flunked religion my freshman year of college. And it kind of said to me, you better pay a little more attention in class and a little less golf. Because I had to take religion in the afternoon. If you were on the golf team, you were gone lots of times in the afternoon, and it was tough to catch up. But you look at what happened historically to you, because I was going to be an actuary at that point. I was going to be an accountant. I was not going to be a pastor. That ate at me then for the next year and a half. And you've probably gone through some of that yourself. I was telling someone about my son, how it's been eating at him for 5 years. Now, when you reach the point when your son has 31 years in with Nokia, has a master's in computer science, and he's been talking to you for 5 years about retiring. That really makes you do some thinking. And you begin to see the history. And now he has. And with retirement, it lasted 2 weeks. And he had another job, doing a little something better that he enjoyed in computers. But think about your history. Yes, Ron. Remember,
You had just mentioned why do things happen. It always amazes me, and I'll just throw this out as one example. Guy is driving down the freeway, hardly any traffic, coming home from work. Another car on the other side going the other way, loses a tire. Tire goes over the barrier, hits the windshield right smack on the driver's side, kills him instantly. How does this happen?
why does it happen?
Why? Yeah. That's just one example. I mean, there's many, many, many things like that that happen every day.
Are we the ones who should try to give the answer to that?
Probably not. I don't know.
Because pastors get asked that very often. Not very often, but
It's,
whenever,
you know, why me?
when you have tragedies, in your congregations. My last congregation in Michigan, I had 2 terrible tragedies, and the parents ask why. It's not my job to be there. God doesn't tell us why. God comforts us and walks with us through our sorrow. That really kind of fits with the 23rd Psalm. Okay, Ann, you want to add something?
Well, I was
Whoop.
that makes me think that there's a lot of stuff that happens in the world all the time, and God isn't necessarily creating that tire to go over there to take that person out. But as a result of that happening, like happened with the doctor, happened with the, all the people attached to this one person, better things happen for a lot of other people because a bad thing happened to one person. And I don't think God makes bad things happen to people so that he can make good things happen to other people. But I think God uses bad things happening to, one, help people grow in their faith. Not that he creates it so they grow, but that's one of the outcomes. And the other is to strengthen them as people so that they can then deal with maybe the next bad thing that's going to happen. I mean, each
That's
bad
good.
thing that's happened in my life has helped me deal with something else, either in my life or in somebody else's life. So I don't think God says, I think I'm going to take that person out today because this person over here needs help. I just think that the world has stuff going on, and like the balloon guy had a flat tire, and that caused him not to be there, and that caused the balloon to go down. And so nobody did anything specific to make it happen, but it did happen, and bad things happened, and then good things happened. So I think it's just the way life is. There are bad things that happen, and then God just helps us find a good way to deal with it.
Good, thank you. I often use the description to simply say, God does not manipulate us. God created the world and gave us the responsibility, the stewardship, quote unquote, to take care of the natural world and all things in our lives as well as possible. But because of sin, other things have entered that life. And it's not our cause, maybe, but God doesn't manipulate things to happen like a tire fly off and go through a windshield. And there are, it's a good example, Ron, because there probably are thousands of examples like that. Everybody's seen them, had a couple, so forth, Anybody else? Okay. So the first lesson is history. Who's the second person that comes on the scene? Cleo. I didn't know how to describe Cleo. Cleo was the dog, but Cleo was the old woman at the Humane Society that supplied the dog, so that Annie had what? Companionship. Companionship. I thought that was an interesting part. Let's see what I got notes-wise. Okay. Despite ways that we try to isolate ourselves on earth, in our final bliss, we are always with someone. And someone said they thought the next person you'd meet in heaven was Jesus. We are always with someone, the Lord Jesus, saints, angels, loved ones. A solitary afterlife seems unimaginably grim. And so there was empathy between the dog and the person that made her have companionship. Any thoughts that anybody wants to add to that? You know, it's my hope that through this, you'll see the book as a whole. You may want to go back and read it through again. I got a lot more out of it the second time, and partially the third time putting this thing together. So you'll find that. And I read the 5 people you meet the second time so I could put the prospectus out there for you before. I like this part of it. Loneliness ends when someone needs you. Loneliness ends when someone needs you. Have you ever considered how many living things there are on earth that can keep you from being lonely, whether it's animals or birds or trees or grass, my flowers? I covered my tomatoes before I came tonight, so I might still have tomatoes through May or something like that, even though I started them last October. Those tomatoes are good. They're not styrofoam. Anybody have any other things to add? Loneliness ends when someone needs you. You know, I was thinking, my father died when he was 65, and my mother lived till 92. What did she do for all those years? She took care of the old people. She drove them to church, she drove them to the store, all of which added up. She had a car, 17 years old, and it had 22,000 miles on it. It was indeed the car that went to the store and went to church, and that was it. But she overcame her loneliness that way by helping others until she had dementia and came to live with us. And so you go through that and see what happens in there. My brother's wife called, must have been 6-8 weeks ago. And she said, I called her, and she said, I was going to call you. And Sylvia and I were classmates in college. And so she said, there's something I want to tell you. She said, Jerry and I are going to get married. She said, it doesn't seem that John's been gone that long. I said, you know, he's really been gone. It was November of 2017 that he died. I said, he's really been gone. She said, he's only been gone a year. I said, you know, he's really been gone about 4 years when he began to get his Alzheimer's, and he had to go into an institution. And Jerry was a lifetime friend that she grew up with. She was in business with him. And what was neat, just to add, what was neat is he flew to Washington, D.C. to meet my nephew, Sylvia's son, and ask his permission to ask his mother if he could ask her to marry him. It was really kind of neat. Okay, so we got Cleo, the dog. So Annie's got some companionship. Now, there was kind of an interlude there about the Pink Island peninsula that things came up, but the third person comes out of that. So, second lesson. Loneliness ends when someone needs you. Okay. The third person. Who was the third person? Mom. I heard her say her mom. Annie's mom was the third person. And what's going to be the third lesson that we learn from that third person? There was a lot there, an awful lot of family interaction taking place. What got learned at that point from her mom? Yes, we need a microphone up here. Teach you all to be the Beatles or the Rolling Stones.
Well, her mom wanted her to know to forgive and to have grace.
Okay? Her mother wanted her to know to forgive and have grace. Who needed to forgive at that point? Annie needed to forgive, didn't she? Did her mom need to forgive too? Yeah.
Her mom thought she was doing the right thing.
Her mom thought she was doing the right thing all along. There were times in the book when she wasn't doing, we would judge it and say she wasn't doing the right thing. Anybody else? Okay. Maybe I ought to back up. Ha ha, caught you.
I think that one of the
Wait a minute.
I think that one of what seems to be a thread that keeps going through is every time you pull into yourself, you tend to make the wrong decision. And every time you look out, you make a better decision. And the mom was trying to protect by only thinking about what was going on her. Annie was always thinking about her and missed all this stuff around her. And when we focus on something going wrong in our lives and close everything else out, I tend to make poorer decisions than if I can look beyond what I think is the most important thing to why is there, what else is going on. Usually you get a broader perspective, gives you better
Is
things.
that easy to do?
No, I didn't say easy, but it's more rewarding when you can get yourself to go there.
Okay, historically then, looking back.
Yeah, usually.
Okay. Everybody kind of agree with that?
Well, I thought it was interesting that the mom felt so much guilt
Yeah.
about being with the boyfriend and, not protecting her daughter, because I didn't see that. I didn't really know what was going on at the park, at the pier. But then when I read that, I thought, oh, the poor mom, she had
Yeah.
all that to deal with. And of course, being a child, you don't see that. I thought the perspective of, the child looking at her mother differently as a real human being, maybe we don't tend to do that sometimes. You know what I mean? You're
Yes.
like, oh yeah, she
yeah.
had her thing going on too. And then I understand the mom wanted to protect her. That made sense to me.
Well, oh, yeah.
That
There were
she
just a
wanted-
lot
of
of
stuff going on.
interactions going on there.
Yeah, I thought that was more for me, maybe because I'm a woman and a mom, but I liked that interaction between, when she meets her mom and they tell their stories.
I thought that was one of the heavier chapters,
yeah. Yeah.
in the whole book at that point. Because, look, this is what you get into. Courage, the need to confess, forgiveness, and grace. All got involved there in the interaction on the third person. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Let's go to the fourth person. And who was the fourth person? Eddie. You said it was Eddie. I said it was the old man from the wedding. It's the same? I put Eddie with a question mark. Just to bring that there. But that, I had to go back and read that part again about the old man at the wedding. And then, of course, what you are seeing here was interspersed throughout with a diary or a biography of Annie's life, sequentially. And I didn't have time to really, well, I had time, but I didn't feel that that was as important to our discussion as this would be. But those things were the settings in history that would cause the lessons that we learn and the people we meet. So what's the fourth lesson we might learn from Eddie the maintenance man, who was always there in the old suit at their wedding? Why was Eddie already in heaven? Or in the afterlife, whatever we want to say. Because he had saved Annie. Yeah.
Again, with him, the interesting story about the girl with the burns. Are we there yet? Or am I ahead of myself?
Yeah.
About,
Right.
and how that all worked, and he needed to be saved. I thought that was really
Yep.
a neat part, too.
And I think that brings out, the whole story up to this point comes up to how salvation works, and it works on our mistakes. I have a discussion question for later. You can just put in your mind that the biography or the diary, whatever you want to call it, that's interspersed, each one is Annie made a mistake. Each one was entitled Annie made a mistake. Okay, we'll go on. The fifth person that Annie meets is Pablo. There's no B in there. At least my book didn't have a B in it. But then, so now it's the two of them. We've built up to this point. I expected that soon one of the five was going to be Paulo. I just knew that. But by the time I got through four, I said, it's got to be. And sure enough, it was. Her husband of how many hours? 12? Something like that. And what do you think? We'll say it's Paulo. What do you think the lesson is on that one? Oh, I gave it away. Maybe not. Everybody see that? Hey, we're supposed to see that. The fifth lesson is live. Be grateful. Now, at the end of that, what happens? What happened to Annie? She goes back home. She comes back. That's the lesson of live. And there's a bigger one behind that, but that becomes part of the epilogue at the end of it. But how do you see that fifth lesson fitting into the whole book? In other words, we've had some history, we've had forgiveness, we've had grace, we've had understanding, and now you think she's up there floating around the clouds, don't you? Yeah, somewhere. Our view of heaven is it's up. Now, I always say, what about the people in China? Is their view down? Or when the world turns, is our view down? We always look at heaven as up. I like to, myself, in my own daily devotions, when I pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Then at the very end, for thine is the kingdom. And I've gotten to the point where And this has evolved for me, that I used to picture our solar system. You know, here's the sun, here's all the planets going around. Now I put the solar system out there in the whole galaxy of creation. And I see it out there just as a little something, but it's the place where we live. And we're looking, there's people walking around saying, it's terrible that we're out there trying to find other life on other planets. That's not terrible. That's someone that's inquisitive. That's where it begins. But we have to get to the point where we need to live and be grateful for each day that we have. And that's where it came down to someone who was 37 years old in the book and died, and how old do we have to be? Do we set a time schedule for when we're going to die? We're going to talk about that. Don't worry. I'm hoping to have some good discussion out of this. Then we get to the epilogue. The epilogue gives us then, remember, live, be grateful, and what becomes the most precious word? I thought I heard somebody say it back there.
Love.
What?
Love.
There's one bigger than that. I think.
Forgiveness.
No. How about home? She's going to live, be grateful. She's going back home. And home is where you find again all these interactions that we've talked about that take place. Okay, good. Now we're going to fly this open for discussion. If you wish, when we get through with this, if we have time, and I think we will, I'm just going to run down the things that Jesus says about the kingdom of heaven in Matthew. And we'll see. And you can ask me about Revelation or by my book, either one. Okay. This is a big thing with Mitch Albom. All endings are beginnings. What does that mean to you? All endings are beginnings. Ann was first.
When I lost my husband, it seemed like that was the end of a lot of things, and it was just the beginning of a new me.
Cool.
So, and I think that happens all through your life. You go to school, and then you quit going to school, and you're a new person when you're, every chapter ends something, and you can't, until you end that, you can't be the next thing.
Okay. Carol?
It just made me think of that old saying, one door closes and another opens.
One wound closes, the other.
One door
closes
and another opens.
Yeah. I'm working on a hearing aid for my right ear at home because Peg sits over there, and I keep saying, what? Any thoughts in the back of the room?
That's why they're in the back.
That's why they're hiding?
Yes.
What does that mean, that all endings are beginnings? Oh, Marilyn says, maybe because there are never any endings. Okay, put that into the perspective of the next 7 weeks. We are in Lent. We're going to journey with our Lord Jesus Christ. To where? The cross. And then, what comes next? The open tomb. So you have there the ending becoming a beginning of life. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. How about this? What does heaven on earth mean to you?
Well, I'm going to go back to Cindy saying there are God moments. There's all kinds of God moments. My
Okay.
goodness. There's so much
Okay.
of heaven on earth if you open your eyes. People, nature. But a lot of God moments.
Okay? What does one, how would you put that with the word peace or serenity? You find that as a God moment or a moment of heaven on earth?
Sure.
Okay. Anybody experienced anything there that really comes through? Okay. Oh, Bill. Bill's got something. Good. Almost the back of the room. Yay.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, immediately it came
Don't
to
be a
mi-
beetle and turn it
Oh,
this
right
way.
there, like that.
Yeah.
Heaven on earth, to me, could be my 3 grandchildren. They are, as my son says, already old souls. They're the most, especially my Matthew. He's just a laid-back, very conscious guy, and he's only 16 years old.
Oh, well.
I mean, but so that would be heaven on earth, having those kids. You know, that's a great thing. You know.
And we are blessed with heaven on earth that we're not raising them 24 hours a day.
Amen. I said amen.
Amen. Anybody else? Chocolate. Oh, yeah. Now you're talking my language. But a little bit of dark chocolate is good for your heart. I justify that every day. A lot is even better, yeah. And a glass of wine is good, but a lot is not better. Okay. Good thoughts. The diary interspersed throughout is entitled Annie Makes a Mistake. Why do you think that was the case? How did that carry the story for you? She felt that everything she did was a mistake. Bill?
I underlined page 82, and this was trying to think who was talking to who here. But in any case, she looked up and said, "There's no such thing as a nobody, and there are no mistakes."
On 82.
182.
182.
182, yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
I was on 82.
The end of that first paragraph there where there's a space.
Okay. I'm getting there. These pages weren't cut very well, did you notice? I've got something underlined on the next page, too.
That was with Tala, with the girl.
That's right, Tala.
Okay. There's no such thing as a nobody, and there are no mistakes?
That's
You spent years doing lots of things and thinking they were all mistakes.
but they were, in fact, not coincidences.
Right. And then what follows that? Right after that comes Lawrence. She was happy that Lawrence, the baby that died, was safe in heaven. She felt a serenity that mortal life had never allowed. A serenity that mortal life had never allowed. We're going to get here in just a minute. Do you ever wonder about your funeral? I love that part. If you read that, you know, what's your obituary is going to say? Who's going to show up? Are you going to be up there looking down to see who made it and who didn't check off attendance? Something like that. Have you ever thought of your funeral? How many have written their obituaries? No, you don't have to tell me. But we had, a couple years ago, Pastor Loma taught a class on death. And he had the people in the class, was a smaller class than this, but they wrote their obituaries. And occasionally I've seen one in the paper where it's written in the first person. That's weird. Saw one a couple months ago, I think. The obituary written in the first person.
They say all the presidents write their own obituaries.
All the presidents, they're already doing that, yeah. All the presidents write their own obituaries. Think about, what would yours say? I could see my last sentence. He thought he was greater than he really was.
Mine would be, I told you I was sick.
Mine would be, I told you I was sick. Okay, that will fit now with the next one that we've hit on a couple of times. Do you ever feel mortal? When and why? Define mortal. Mortal on earth would be, do you ever feel like you're going to die? And when do you think that would be?
I would say it doesn't matter.
Marilyn says it wouldn't matter. Okay? It's going to happen. Cindy? Hey!
I feel mortal when someone my age passes away, and I'm going, why that person and not me? Or that could have been that could have been me and not so and so. That's when I feel mortal, when it's someone my age.
That's a good point. They'd have to be pretty young. This is confession. The Lutheran Church puts out, anybody here subscribe to the Living Lutheran? Lutheran, okay. The Living Lutheran is the magazine of the ELCA. And in the next to last page, every month, it lists the obituaries. Who's died. I mean, just as a little bit where they served. And there's probably anywhere from 15 to 25 each month of pastors and deacons who have died. I look down there, first of all, to see how many of them I know. Having served from California to Wisconsin to Ohio to Michigan, South Carolina, and Florida, I do know a few pastors. The next thing I look at is their age. And I love to read, you know, there's been a lot of them living into their 80s. I just think that's spectacular, you know. I'm going to experience that about 3 months. And that's why I feel mortal. There's a big number coming up in my life. You think, gee, did I ever think I was going to live this long?
Dean, does the number really make any difference?
Marilyn says, does the number really make any difference? What does make the difference?
How you feel.
How you feel. Okay.
And I think your faith, your relationship with God.
Your faith, your relationship with God. Cindy? your attitude. Yeah, there are some people out there with bad attitudes. You have to overcome them and smile. And you meet them in the grocery store. You know how they shop in the villages? You don't know how they shop in the villages? Here's your cart, okay? You're going down the aisle. Oh, there's something I want to see. And they leave the cart back there sideways, and you want to get by, and they're up there about 5 feet looking on the shelf. What does that have to do with feeling mortal? I don't know.
When you want to kill them.
No, not really. Let's see if I got anything else. If you knew you were about to die, how would you spend your final hours? Praying. Showing your loved ones that you love them. Texting. Texting people. Is that what our president's trying to do? Never mind. Al? He needs a mic.
I don't believe I'd do anything different. You say you do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
You ought to be doing them
Okay.
every day.
Very good. You all know what Luther said when he was asked that question. He said, I planned to plant a tree tomorrow, so I will plant it. It was to be an apple tree. If that has any significance with Genesis and our wrong interpretation of what creation was all about, but that's another class in and of itself. And?
I don't know where this, well, it's real short, you can repeat.
Real short.
There's a saying that too late can come too soon.
Too late can come too soon.
I was going to do that, and I didn't, so it's too late.
I was going to do that, but I didn't. So therefore, it's too late.
Person died before I got to do what I was going to do.
Okay. Anyone else? Those are good. Bill?
To that, I would say, don't do anything you regret, and don't regret anything you do. Works for
Don't
me.
do anything you regret, and don't regret anything you do.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? I think that's about my last question there. One point it says, salvation, here's how salvation works. The wrongs we do open the doors to do right. That was very poignant in nature. Now, how big's your funeral going to be? Who will show up? In the end, it's meaningless. I hope I can get these back in the right order tomorrow. What am I going to do here? Okay. That's the fifth lesson. Live, be grateful. Because there's more after this. Don't worry. Just a little bit.
Pastor?
Yes.
Oh, I thought
Go ahead.
I thought you were done. Something really hit me. It's on page 207, the last paragraph
Boy,
before
yeah.
this. The last paragraph, 207.
Yep.
The last paragraph. This has happened to me so often that I don't know what to make of it sometimes. But a speeding car from striking him he was pulled out of the way. A tragedy that a different version of the world had planned. A version that did not grant Annie and Paula one night of marriage, nor the child that they would come from it. But there are so many times our lives are altered invisibly. And in my case, there's a lot of times it's obvious.
The flip of a pencil from written to erased. Al.
I think you're now done with the book. When I got to the end, I said, the title of this book was, Who was the next person you were going to meet in heaven?
Mm-hmm.
Who was it? He went through 5 people again,
Right.
rehashing.
Well, you'll
Who
have
was
to.
the next person?
You'll have to write the Mitch album about that. I don't have that answered. You know, the whole premise is you're going to meet 5 people who affected your lives. Now, I think he builds into that when you get to the 5th person and you get Annie going back to going to nursing again or whatever. You know, in my mind, that's what I saw. Cindy, you want to say something?
Just handing it back to me.
Okay.
Yes, we're talking about 5 people. And there's like Mom and Eddie and Paulo and Cleo. I was wondering if we would take the opposite direction. What are 5 people we don't want to meet in heaven? And from that, what would be the lessons we should learn from that?
In your minds, do you think that would happen in heaven?
Who says we're going to get to heaven?
Okay. Let's see what Jesus says about that. Jesus references, this is just from Matthew, and I've skipped a couple, but by and large, this is what Jesus says. He starts out in the 3rd and 4th chapters saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Means it's there. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus, this is Jesus, proclaims the good news of the kingdom, cures diseases and sicknesses. And then we get into the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, the poor, if you look at that in the Greek, the word is more humble than poor. Because we think poor is someone who doesn't know anything, someone who doesn't own anything. But this is blessed are the humble in spirit. And I've dealt with lots of people that are humble in spirit. And you're all humble in spirit. Whoever breaks commandments will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Does that eliminate a lot of it? Hold on to that, Carol. We'll come back to it, okay? Then in the end of the after the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, he closes with the Lord's Prayer and says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Have we talked about anything physical at this point? What are we talking about? Interaction between what? Between ourselves and God. At the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, but strive first for the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given to you. Strive first for the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given to you. And here we go. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Ooh, that's scary, isn't it? But what about what we learned about grace and forgiveness and the cross that's coming up? And Jesus promises from there. How about this? Now, if you're thinking of it as a physical place, just for a moment, think of it as a physical place. Many will come from east and west and will eat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. You know there's going to be food. Were you worried about that, Marilyn? Chocolate, yeah. Then Jesus again says, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. No one born of woman has risen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And on it goes. There are parables that talk about the secrets to the kingdom of heaven, many parables. Chapter 13 of Matthew, good place to look for the parables. We'll be talking about those in 2 weeks from tonight. You got the parable of soils, the weeds, the good seed, the fertile earth, mustard seed, leaven, hidden treasure, pearl of great value, net, treasures old and new. All of those parables are in that one chapter of Matthew, chapter 13. And we'll hit those first thing 2 weeks from tonight. Or if you come on Wednesday morning, it'll be 2 weeks from tomorrow. Another one, you get back to later chapters, and he has the laborers in the vineyard. Oh, I have had members struggle with that, laborers in the vineyard, where the one who works 1 hour gets paid the same as the one who works all day. That's earthly, right? Now we're judging earthly things. We're not judging, we end up judging God because we're asking, why? I mean, what union you belong to? So that we have trouble with that. The wicked tenants, the wedding feast of the king's son. What do? You go out to the highways and byways and invite them to come in. You got the 10 maidens. 5 lit their candles and 5 didn't. You've got talents. And then that's enough of that. You probably wonder a little bit maybe what, I already did this. I was hitting the wrong side. Okay, we just quote Mitch Albom one more time here, who says, this novel and its version of the afterlife is a wish and not a dogma. How many of your versions of the afterlife are wishes? And how many are guided by dogma? That's why I read all of the parables. They don't have much to do with dogma and judgment except the ones on the commandments. And no one keeps those. All of them. Okay. What, anybody see that saying anything to them? We're moving along. This is great, good timing. How do we see the afterlife, and did this book change our feelings? Anyone? Ann?
It's interesting.
We'll get my runner.
Thank you. Okay. I lost my train of thought. I don't know. Okay, I've got one. I have one.
Okay,
Okay, now I'm thinking of the dog,
Cleo.
Cleo. Yes. Now, what do you think? Do you think our dogs will be up there in heaven?
Who says
said-
heaven is up there?
Well, okay, wherever it is.
Okay. My book says that God will create a new heaven and a new earth.
So dogs can be there.
I don't know. I'm not worried. I had a dog once that I hope's not there. You can ask Peg. You can ask Peg about the dog from hell. I mean, we had that dog for 3 years, but we had a couple of other good ones. But that, you know, this our view of the afterlife is very much based upon our lives here on earth. Experience, how we compare the things that we would like to see better instead of seeing them as an afterthought, see them as a present thought. Okay, what do I have? Oh, yeah. And I would say that when you put together what we see as the kingdom of heaven, it's going to look like this. I thank all of you for being here tonight, for participating in the discussion, and you all go home now and root for Michigan State. Thank you again. God bless.
At Go Gophers.